Good evening and a warm welcome back to another session in the series of Meeting an Expert. It's indeed a very interesting session that we all can look forward to with an amazing personality on board today. So, to start with, let me warmly welcome all our students who are joining from all over the counterpart universities, of course, and at APITA as well, and all our colleagues who are joining from our counterpart universities, Staffordshire University, Deakin University, and of course, AIT Thailand. So, having said that, of course, let me also warmly welcome all our delegates who are joining from all around the world who are going to be with us for this 1 hour today. And finally, to start off, I would like to invite our chairman of APIT Sri Lanka, Mr. Mandula Egodage, to share his expressions and to start the welcoming. So, over to you, Chairman.
Kaushali, indeed, it's a great pleasure to welcome my school time friend here as the chief guest. So, in fact, on behalf of the CEO, Roshan Egodage, and the board of directors, our student population and lecturers, everyone, very warmly welcome you here, sir. In fact, you know that APIT is known for quality education in Sri Lanka. But those who are passing out from APIT, they will have definitely the academic excellence. So it's the great initiative of Dr. Rohantha. He wants to add certain interactions with the CEOs and the opinion leaders of this country every Wednesday. Today we are having a very versatile sort of a gentleman. He has the opinion leader to share his experience with our student population. In fact, it's a great privilege for our student population. As you know that during our school time we didn't have that reach. So here we believe, APIT believe in more than the academic excellence. We believe that all the people who are passing out has to be great leaders, leadership skills, and something beyond. So that is why, sir, we are inviting person like you to have the direct interaction with the student population. I know that some of the diplomatic, the population also connecting some of the ambassadors. So here, looking at Mr. Sarinda Unambua's face, you don't think that he's a great cricketer. You don't think that he has so many other extracurricular activities, and more than that, he's a nice personality who wants to do something for the society, which I know personally. So why I am bringing this personality to you, students, dear students, to get everything out of him today. We are giving that platform to listen to him, what sort of the great contribution that is making to the society. So that is the whole objective with this seminar. I kindly request all of you to take the maximum out of Mr. Sarinda Unambua. Rohantha, as usual, thank you very much for your great initiative. Thank you, Sarinda, for being my old friend, and thank you for your valuable time for being with us today. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kaushali and Dr. Rohantha.
Thank you very much, Chairman, not only at APIT, but Chairman of the Industrial Association for Sri Lanka, Vice President Nestle, and of course, a board director of Commercial Credit as at yesterday. So thank you very much. And today I'm actually honored to introduce, amazing personality. CEO of MAS Krida, a member of the MAS Apparel Board. He's a committed conservationist, a champion of environmental sustainability, and sits on MAS Sustainability Steering Committee. A committed agent of change, a key driving force behind the Work From Anywhere initiative at MAS. He's a strong advocate of flexible work policies that help to empower women in leadership roles. Sarinda has walked the length of Sri Lanka twice, ridden a bicycle around Sri Lanka 4 times to raise funds for 2 separate charities he co-founded. Trail and the Wheels of Wheels is a published photographer, a wildlife photographer, passionate about physical fitness. He believes a healthy, active body is key to healthy, creative mind. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the CEO of MAS Krida, member of the MAS Apparel Board, ladies and gentlemen, Sarinda Unambua. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rohanta. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for that introduction. And it's good to see you after probably 30 plus years. It's been a long journey. I appreciate all the kind words. I hope it doesn't turn into be a bit of a disappointment, because I certainly am not an academic by any means. And I can't claim to be that either. I think there are careers that are formed by design and by default. And I'd like to think that mine has been a mix of those two. I'm just how I'm going to structure this is I don't have any presentations, because as I was telling Rohanta earlier, when we were growing up, cameras were a rare commodity. Although now everything that we do, from everything that we eat to everything that we see, ends up on social media. In the past, so we don't have too many records of our childhood or our youth. But what I would like to do is just walk you through my life journey in a very concise kind of way, and tell you what helped me personally in terms of getting to where I am. I don't by any means say that where I am is an aspiration for any one of y'all. Y'all should be aspiring to get way beyond what I have been able to do, and aspire to do much better than I have done. I really don't believe that I have achieved anything super great. But it's been an interesting journey. It's been something that when I look back on, I'm quite proud of, because I've had to switch gears, as it were, through my life to be able to get to where I want to get. So let me start off by saying, as the chairman, when he was introducing me, said the first part of my life revolved around sport. I went to school at Royal College, and basically, I don't think anyone will ever speak of the grades that I achieved in my academic career, but I like to think that I left behind some memories on the sporting field. And that was my focus. And the one thing that, if you look at the different things that you learn along the way, at that time, we didn't have a lot of education about mental preparation or, mental strength or visualization, any of that stuff. It happened kind of by default. I had a dream of playing certain sports for my school. And from the time I was extremely young, and this is probably because my father played the same sports for college, that's rugby, athletics, and cricket. From the time I was very young, it was my dream as well to try and achieve this and try and emulate his achievements. So in a young mind, a very clear memory or a very clear vision was formed of having to play, of wanting to play these three sports. So that visualization aspect set in very early. And I used to constantly stand in front of a mirror with a bat and, pretend that I was playing in the Royal Thomaian, or pretend that I was playing for Sri Lanka or whatever it may be, and just go through those motions on a regular basis. So we'll fast forward a little bit from there, because that was one lesson that when I look back, that I really focused on the visualization part of what I wanted to achieve in my school life. When I came to the end of my schooling career, I was very fortunate because I didn't have the grades to back me. I was very fortunate that due to my athletics performance, I got a scholarship in a university in the US. And going to the US at that time was very different from going to school at a time like this. One is we didn't have a lot of finances to be able to help us. I was fortunate to have got almost a full scholarship to my university. And the other thing was, when you went there, you were pretty much isolated from your family, from your parents, from everything that is familiar, and put in an environment that is completely alien. We didn't travel a lot when we were young. We didn't have a lot of exposure to the Western world because communication was very limited. Social media was non-existent. Televisions only came in when I was about 15 or 16. And even then, we only saw programs like Sesame Street or some nonsensical other program that went on. So the shock of going to university was quite severe. We went there, no telephone calls, apart from the rare occasion like a birthday. We had to write letters. And if you wrote a letter home, it took 2 weeks for it to get here and then 2 weeks for a response to come. So if you had a problem, if you hadn't sorted that problem out in that 4 weeks, you were in deep trouble. So I believe that those things, the reason I'm telling you all this stuff is I believe that those things, that harsh kind of environment that you suddenly were dropped into, either made you or they broke it. basically you were either created into being a strong individual who could survive in that environment, adapt to any environment and be able to thrive, or you crumbled under the pressure and then you crawled under a rock and vanished. So thankfully, with the help of my the sports as a backbone to what I was doing there, I managed to survive the first couple of years. Then I went through a big crisis in my life, and I'm going to share something a bit personal here, but I think it's important in the context of what we're talking about. I went on an athletic scholarship, and the very first season that I ran in, I was doing reasonably well, and I had a really pretty much a career-ending injury, which meant that having played a sport, having been a part of a sport from the time I was probably 9 or 10 years old, at 21, I suddenly had no identity. I felt like I had no identity because I was no longer part of a team. I couldn't compete at the level that I expected to compete, and I had aspirations of coming back and running for Sri Lanka and various things like that. All that came to a grinding stop with a blown out hamstring. And then I went into a competitive sport of alcohol and substance abuse for about a year. I just went completely off the rails and did some extremely hardcore partying and went into a very dark place in my life. Thankfully, as opportunity would have it, I suddenly, there's a series of events that happened, and I was introduced to the sport of rowing. And after 1 year of complete chaos in my life, where I almost got kicked out of my university and almost got kicked out of my scholarship, I managed to get into the rowing team and started an incredible relationship with this rowing as a sport, which completely changed my life. And the reason I say it was an incredible relationship, because rowing, from all the sports I have played, and I have played at A division level rugby and athletics, and B division level I played cricket. I played at the reason I'm saying that is I played at a fairly high level, and I can tell you nothing comes close. The physical demands of rowing. The physical demands of rowing are next level. So you have to be extremely fit, and it's an extremely mentally demanding thing, because you go out on the water. I went to school in upstate New York, go out of the water in freezing cold, and you had to really be mentally strong to be able to do that. So I believe it really changed me. Then that got me back on track, and it gave me the kind of focus, and I managed to commit myself to making a change in my life and completing my university degree. Now, most people, by the time they complete their university degree, have some idea of what they want to do in life. I didn't have a clue. I was thrilled that I managed to graduate by the skin of my teeth. I can't profess that my grades were anywhere close to something that I can be proud of. But I did graduate, and I came back, and the smartest decision I made in my life at that stage was to decide to come back to Sri Lanka. Now, you have to bear in mind I graduated in 1988. Most of you all weren't born. And during this time, in 88, there were two major crises going on in Sri Lanka. There was on one side the JVP insurrection, and on the other side, the LTTE terrorists attacking. So there was chaos in Sri Lanka at that time. When I came back, most people who had gone to university overseas opted to stay back. They didn't want to come back into this burning environment, literally burning environment, that offered very few opportunities at that time. The local universities had shut down, so there were very few graduates coming out at that time. And when I came into the job market, but they say in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, I found that my degree that I barely managed to earn was worth a fair amount, because there weren't too many people with degrees coming back. And a foreign degree at that time was looked at as something special. And I managed to get myself into the job market at a fairly high level. And there also, I actually set about what I wanted to do in a very different way. Now, most people will look at a career they want to develop and start looking at their career. I looked at the life that I wanted to have. And at the age of about 24 or 25, I was very clear of what kind of life I wanted to have. And I, in a very kind of ad hoc way, I used to draw little life maps, little sketches of what I wanted out of my life. I wanted a spacious, beautiful home. I wanted to be able to travel. I wanted to have the luxury of being able to do whatever I wanted without any financial restrictions. I wanted to have good health. I wanted to have a happy family. And, so like that, I made a plan of what my life could be. And I'm just going to show you all something. I don't know whether you all will see it on the camera. This is a book that I carry with me to this day. Okay, I don't know. Okay, so what that says there is it's a life well lived. And that is my kind of the core plan that I have for my life. Right? So this is a book I carry with me wherever I go. It's been with me for years and it keeps getting recycled and I keep adding things to it. And it is a reminder to me of what I want my life to be like. And it's a reminder to me to check up to see whether my life is on track. So when I started off in 1988, looking out for a career, I wasn't looking for a career in a particular industry. I was looking to see the management trainee program that paid me the highest salary. And those of y'all who, I don't know how many of y'all have actually got to met me or know me, I'm not a mathematics kind of person, and I'm not a finance kind of person. I'm not somebody who enjoys that aspect of business. And the first job I got was in a bank. I joined a bank called American Express Bank, which has now evolved to be Nations Trust Bank, for the simple reason that they had the highest paying management trainee package. To put it in context, companies like John Keys, Aitken Spence, Haley's, all of them, the management trainee salary was about 1,500 rupees a month. Hong Kong Bank was paying 6,000 rupees a month along with IBM, and American Express Bank paid 7,500. So I joined American Express Bank without having a clue about banking. I could write a check. That's about all I could do. I didn't have any other details about what banking was. So joined the company, joined the bank, and learned a hell of a lot, because that was a time where foreign banks were doing a fair amount of work with the government. So I worked with companies like, Lanka Milk Foods, Tractor Corporation, some big accounts, Fertilizer Corporation, CWE, Satosa, that were opening these massive LCs for everything from Bombay onions to petroleum. And then we worked with petroleum as well. So got a really good exposure for about 3 years. And one of my projects was try and go and solicit business from John Keys. And when I started going into John Keys, I realized that John Keys had a really nice atmosphere at that time. There was a lot. Mr. Ken Balendra had just become chairman, and he was creating a very nice culture there. And there was a good hype around everything that was going on there. And to be very honest, there were also a lot of good-looking women at that time. I'm sure there are still, but at that time, so it was very inspirational for me to go into the office on a regular basis and try and solicit business from. On one of my trips, I met Mr. Ajit Gunawardhan. And Ajit called me and said, would you like to come and have work with us at some point? And to cut a long story short, he offered me a job at John Keys Stockbroking. Now that was 1991. And in 1991, the stock market, if you'll go back and look at the numbers, there was no stock market. I mean, my average turnover for a day was probably 200,000 rupees. And he was talking to me about how it could potentially go to 2 million rupees turnover a day, and then maybe even 10 million rupees turnover a day. And he was saying the foreign funds are going to start investing. And he gave me this really strong story about what could potentially happen in the stock exchange. So then I had to make a career choice. By that time, I had got married. I had a young kid. My first son was born at that time. So I had to make a choice, because if I was leaving American Express, I had to take a salary cut, because John Keys' salary scales were not comparable. I don't believe they're comparable yet, but nevertheless, at that point, I think the smartest decision I made was to take that gamble, to look at moving from the banking sector into John Keys, into stockbroking industry. And I had a 9.5-year spell there. That was extremely exciting. I learned a hell of a lot. And being in the stockbroking industry at that time, I got to meet incredibly influential people. And I worked myself up to Director General Manager at John Keys Stockbrokers. And being the head of sales there meant that when I made phone calls to even the Prime Minister of the country or ministers or, anybody, chairman of any company, they would answer my phone call. And they would also give me meetings at short notice. So I got to meet some really interesting people and really educated myself and made those connections with people. I'm not really good at networking much because I'm a bit of I don't really like to socialize much, but this gave me an opportunity to meet people and really develop those connections that helped me, that were very useful for me later on in life. So while I was going on there, then I had my second son. So I was still very young. My first son was born when I was 26 and second at 29. So by the time I was 30, I had two young kids. And I was finding it difficult to live the life that I wanted to live because financially it was impossible to live on what John Keys was paying us. So then I started looking around to see what options I had available for me to in Sri Lanka. Again, I wasn't looking at specific industries. I wasn't looking at a specific career. I was looking at where I wanted to be in my life. What did I want? What was my aspiration in life? Was I achieving it? No, I wasn't even close. I was somewhere there. I was on track, but nowhere close to where I wanted to be. At the same time, I was going through a bit of a personal crisis. My marriage was ending and it was a very difficult time in my life. So I had to make a decision. As a single parent, luckily my ex-wife also has a very successful career and thankfully we are good friends now. But at that time, being a single parent meant that I needed the financial depth of pocket, as it were, that I didn't have. So I looked around, looked again in Sri Lanka as to who was paying the most. And at that time, MAS Holdings came out as one of the companies that were paying their CEOs or senior leaders the best packages. Again, a very almost materialistic approach to how I wanted to look at my career. But in the spirit of openness, I'm telling you all, I didn't have these grand plans of becoming CEOs of one company or another. My grand plan was to have a good life. And everything else kind of, what I was working on was how do I get there? So I looked at these opportunities. I looked at MAS and I had the opportunity once at a wedding to sit next to Mahesh Ammathia. And after speaking with him, I thought, man, this guy is a real visionary. And he's a real cool dude to go and work with. So I made up my mind that I was going to get myself a job at MAS. And again came the visualization, again came the plan, an assessment of my skills, assessment of what the job would require. And I realized that I had no people skills, not people skills, leadership skills in management of workforces. I had never managed labor. And when it looked at manufacturing, I had no manufacturing experience. That was a different thing. I had only been in marketing-oriented jobs. So I wanted to go into a situation that there was labor. And I wanted to get that labor experience behind me to pad my CV up to make it look good that I could apply for a job at MAS. So I walked into Ajit Gunawardana's office and I said, boss, I need a change. And he said, what's the change you need? Because at that time, the stock market also had gone into this massive slump. So I went into his office and I'm talking to him and Ajit and I have a very good relationship. I've known him for many years and to this day he's one of my most respected individuals that I know. I spend a lot of time with him still, having a good chat and a good laugh. Walked in, I said, I want to go into a company that has a lot of labor and is a really, really shitty place to work in. And he started laughing at me and he said, what the hell is wrong with you? What do you mean? I said, look, I want to go into a place because I want labor experience. I've never done that. And also I want to go into a horrible place because I can't go and screw it up. If I go there, I can either let it continue the way it is going or I'll do something and turn it around. So having had a good laugh, he said, okay, give me a few days. Then he came back and offered me a couple of options. And one of the options was to take over Keel Super, the supermarket chain. At that time, there were 5 or 6 supermarkets. There was a turnover about 2 billion rupees and they were making a loss of 27 million rupees. So he said, okay, here's the mandate. Go and turn this thing around or shut it down. This was 1999. And so I went in there and I must say the initial shock of having to deal with a very hostile JVP union that had even physically threatened and tried to kidnap my predecessor's children, and there was all kinds of chaos that went in there. I had two of the most amazing years of experience that I've ever had. I have never learned so much dealing with people, learning from people who are far smarter than me in many cases, and really opening my eyes to how you dealt with labor and how it's not really that much of a complicated thing. It just takes human qualities. You just have to treat human beings like human beings, and that'll work itself out. But anyway, that's for another talk. This is not about how to handle labor. But that experience was extremely valuable to me. And when you all drive around, we'll see Key Super is still standing. So in a short period of time, we managed to turn it around. It didn't take rocket science. It just took a little bit of common sense and some hard work. It turned around, and then I was having lunch with a friend of mine who was at that time a senior leader at Hong Kong Bank. And he said, "Did you see the ad in the papers for a CEO at MAS?" Because I was talking about wanting to change jobs. I said, "No." And then he said, "Give me your CV, I'll send it in there." So I didn't think I was ready, but I huffed and puffed, and anyway, I didn't do anything about it. I kept the CV to myself, got the CV, and finally, my friend Sriyan Kure, who was my friend I was referring to, came to my house one day and said, "Give me your bloody CV." So then I gave him a CV. It was one page, a single page. That was my CV. And about a week or two later, I was given a call by Diane Gomez, and who said, "Come and meet him in his office in Slimline." Did some exams. 2-3 months later, I got the job and started at a company called Linear Aqua, setting it up from scratch. And so that basically was the journey to MAS. My journey at MAS has been a very special one as well. Have thoroughly enjoyed working there because we were given a lot of responsibility, a lot of freedom in how to work. And at Linear Aqua, I set it up from a greenfield project. Literally, it was a rubber estate. Cut the trees down. I was so sad to cut trees down, but when we replanted almost every single, replaced almost every single tree after one we had planted, after we had cut it down in different places. However, the experience of starting a company up from scratch and building it up from nothing, without the experience in apparel, without the experience in that kind of in manufacture at all, was a massive learning experience. It was something that was, personally, again, a huge development curve. We had a good run at Linear Aqua. At very early stage of the operation, we managed to manufacture the swimsuits for Speedo, for the Olympics, the fast skin suits. We did a lot of Olympic gear. We did some high-end fashion products. And it was seen in a very short period of time as one of the best swimwear plants in the world. Then came an opportunity, MAS, 5 years ago. MAS, I was a part of the board at that time. I joined the board. I was invited to the board quite early on. And MAS was looking to create the first ever pillar for a single customer, which was Nike. Because Nike had said that they want to grow their business with MAS to $1 billion, and that they would only do that if that pillar was created for themselves as a separate entity to be able to protect all their IP and to protect their sovereignty in manufacturing. So when that separation was taking place, they were talking about who should lead it, and I was part of those discussions. And I was thinking to myself, I'm no spring chicken. I'm at the end of my career, but it would be nice to do something challenging again, because I had settled into a very comfortable kind of groove at Linear Aqua. I knew exactly what was going to happen before it happened, because I'd been there for 16 years. So I put my hand up and said, if you're looking for somebody to head this, I'll take it. So again, it was everybody looked at me quite surprised, and they offered me the position. I took it, and so that's been it. Took the job. It's been a fantastic run. We have grown the company about 400% in the last 5 years, 300% actually in the last 5 years. It's been an incredible journey. It's one of the strongest growing accounts at MAS at the moment, and in Sri Lanka at the moment. If you look at the textile plants, the fabric mills in Sri Lanka, are going to show extremely strong growth over the next couple of years. Now, this can't be insider trading on the stock exchange, but extremely strong growth over the next few years, because we are going to be doing a lot of our sourcing a lot of our supplies locally, which means that the industry is going to have a really decent run. So that has been the career aspects of, basically my journey in a very concise period of time. I don't want to bore you all with too many tedious details. Rohantha, with your permission, what I'd like to do is maybe open it. Maybe you and I can have a couple of, you can ask me a couple of questions and I can elaborate on a few things that you think I need to speak on. Or we can open it to questions from the audience.
Thank you, Surinder. I mean, amazing, such a simple way in which you shared this whole story, but I mean, outstanding. So it gave me a little bit of time to prepare myself. I mean, there are so many things here which is not even mentioned in your introduction, but you captured it so good. But tell me, what really makes you tick? What drives you, Surinder?
I love life. I love living life. I enjoy doing all the stuff that I do. I love going to the jungles and doing my wildlife thing. I love spending time with my sons, who are now adults and probably older than most people in this class. And I just enjoy what I do, Rohantha. I enjoy the gift of life that has been given to us. And that is one thing. And also, I'm really fortunate that without having any clue in manufacturing, I like to think that I have a decent understanding of manufacturing and really enjoy tinkering with processes and making changes. And even in a work environment, I don't enjoy riding on the status quo. I don't like to let things just go. So we're constantly trying to tinker. We are constantly trying to change. We're constantly trying to use the latest technology that's available. And I'm really fortunate to have some extremely smart young people working with me, and I learn so much from them. So I have to say that, all the plans I made on my little book and all the notes that I have made about having a fulfilling career and a fulfilling life, I'm fortunate that a lot of it has been, has materialized. I mean, I've had a lot of failure in my life as well. I've had 2 failed marriages. I have had, various hiccups in my career. And there's been a lot of negativity as well. But I think overall, I see myself as a very positive person. To me, the glass is always half full. And
well, you say, I think I've done what I have to do, and, you're a little bit successful here, but from an outsider, I'm telling you, I mean, to us, you are an absolute amazing success story. I mean,
you're being too kind. You're being too kind.
I suppose you don't. I mean, you always tend to be very critical of what you do, but I've heard you when I was chairman of EDB. I've heard you so much in the apparel circles. And I mean, you're a legend in simple words. Sorry, and I just want to, since you didn't show anything, I want to show you a few things. So, how important was this in your life?
Oh wow! That photograph was taken in Matara, at the end of our second trail walk. That's my partner Nathan and myself hugging on top of the southernmost point of Sri Lanka, as that little plaque at the bottom there shows. Trail, my experience on trail and what we achieved there, and being a part of that incredible effort that so many people came together to make happen, was definitely one of the highlights in my life. I was extremely, extremely fortunate to have been a part of that. This photograph brings out a lot of emotion. This is a very, very emotional time, very emotional photograph.
So, sorry, what, I mean, you have done the corporate thing, and I mean, you are managing director on the boards of one of the most sought after companies in Sri Lanka. I would say number one company in Sri Lanka, MAS. Many sitting on the main board, and you know, and of course, you know, there's so much of aura in the corporate world when you say Sarindu Nambua, and then you. No, I'm being very serious. I'm very serious on what I'm saying, and then you said, no, guys, I need to do something else, and I'm going to build that hospital, that cancer hospital with, you know, Nathan. You know, y'all. I know y'all went to the corporates. You couldn't raise any money. All the corporates said no, and then you said no. I'm going to walk. You know, I mean, what made you like one day go and tell your boss, guys, I'm taking 1 month off and I'm going to walk from, you know, from Galle to Jaffna, and I mean, I mean, what did he tell you? You know, just imagine somebody comes and tells me, my son one day comes and says, I'm going to walk. I told the Bhagavad, I think you need to walk home now. You know what I'm saying?
Well, to be honest, he was one of the biggest supporters of the walk. And if not for MAS coming in with the first big contribution, MAS was the first person to believe in this. So Mahesh, Nathan and I had been talking about this, and you know, a lot of people had been turning us down. We went to the big corporates, we went to former employees, we went all over the place, and they didn't see the merit of it because the first walk was done in 2011. And during 2011, when we went from Mathura to Jaffna, the situation in the north wasn't still very peaceful because there were still a lot of people in camps that they had no residences. They were sent back to their residences. The north was still being built. The A9 was a mud track. There was no road. It was still very, very early days. The war had finished only 2 or 3 years before that. So there was a lot of people didn't believe that it could be done. A lot of people didn't believe that that was the right time. So we didn't get any support. But when Mahesh walked up to Nathan and me one day and he said, are you guys serious about doing this walk? So he said, yes, we are. And he said, okay, we'll support you. MAS will support you, not just with money, but we will support you to organize it and run it. What more can you ask for from an employer? No, to me, quite apart from the fact that I have absolutely enjoyed, I fight with everybody in the leadership team. I'm not the easiest person to work with because I have very strong opinions and sometimes my opinions are completely wrong, but I still argue and fight and make life very difficult. But I have massive respect for the organization and the leadership of that organization because of things like this. Not only do they allow you the freedom to run the companies that the way we run them, and the freedom to strategize and do what we want to do without constantly looking over our shoulder and telling us what we should be doing, but also they support us in achieving our personal dreams. And Nathan and I had this dream. The walk, I was going to walk to celebrate the end of the war. The hospital was entirely Nathan's doing. He's the one who came and said, why don't we build a hospital for the walk? I was just going to celebrate peace. That was it. But people said, do it for a cause. And then when I was looking for a cause, Nathan's cause became, something really, this was very special day. This was Colombo. Yeah, I can see Shangri-La coming up in the background.
So now the hospital is up and running, Sarinder?
One hospital is up and running, Rohan. That's the one in the north. But the one in the south, we have put the foundation. The piling has been done. But it's supposed to be built by the Ministry of Health. And it's been 6 years now and they haven't done a thing. And we keep talking. The military is supposed to be building it. And we have spoken to everybody from the president, the health minister to the general. They are building 80 clubs and they're building all kinds of other nonsense. And the hospital hasn't got built yet. So we can't do anything because the Jaffna hospital was very different because that was a standalone hospital. And that we had complete jurisdiction over. The hospital we are building in Karapitia, we are building the first 5 floors and the next 4 floors are being built by the health ministry, and all the service elements like the air conditioning, the water, everything is on the rooftop. So we can't even complete 5 stories and say we'll get a private contractor and do it because it will be a shell. it'll be empty, dysfunctional. So till the health ministry, without, I don't want to get too political here, but dragging their bums around, if they can, there's $5 million that we have collected. Some of that money is now deteriorating because it's in rupee accounts. It's devaluating. We are losing money. And a lot of people...
Actually, it leads me to the next question, which is, now we have a set of youngsters. I mean, there are about 400 actually on different platforms listening to you today as we speak. There are 400 master's students studying at APIT for the Staffordshire MBA. Now, what is your advice, Sarinder? I mean, you're not just a CEO. I mean, we have interviewed people like Haja Ali Fafi, chairperson of Unilever, to Fabrice at Nestle. But, you're a thoroughbred Sri Lankan who says, I want to celebrate the war, the end of the war, and then somebody says, let's go and, build a hospital, and then you say, okay, let's do that. And then you collect $2 million, and you somehow make in terms of, putting that into reality. Now, today, we are in a very sad situation, and you just gave one example at Karapitia. What is your advice to a youngster, Sarinder, here?
Never give up, because the thing is, if people like us give up, what's going to happen? If I believe that when you want to get something done, if you see something that you can make a change in, don't stand around, don't sit around waiting for governments to do it or somebody else to do it. Just get up and go and try and get it done. I mean, if you can build even one toilet for a hospital, let alone a hospital, just go and do it. So when we set ourselves to build the hospital, we started off with thinking we'll collect, about $500,000 and then build a ward. Then we thought, no, we build a hospital, and we ended up the hospital in Tellipalli. If for those of you who have seen it, it's actually a pretty impressive hospital. I must say so myself. It's a nice hospital. It's provided incredibly valuable service to many people in the north who struggled and suffered for a long time. And that's what we want to do in the south as well, because we want to be able to support in whatever way we can, because we have the ability to do it. We had the resources to do it, and we had the support to do it. And that's why we decided to do it. I mean, it would have been very easy just to sit back at home and say, screw it, we made one hospital, why should we build another? Let the government do it. We felt that we owed it to people. And it wasn't, it was about bringing the north and south together. It was like, trying to give something to the north and something to the south that was of equal value. Because I truly believe that this is one Sri Lanka. I do not condone racism in any shape or form. I travel to the north more than I travel to any other part of this country. I spend more time. In fact, I just got back from Kilinochchi yesterday. This is a beautiful country with beautiful people. And if you see how people came together to make this happen from all walks of life, from all races, all religions. I mean, people came from mosques, covils, temples, churches to help us. So there was absolutely, if the cause is right and if there is leadership given and direction given, people come together regardless of creed, religion, color, whatever. We're one people, one Sri Lanka. We've got a tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. If we can't protect this and we can't do something to improve this, who the hell is going to be held responsible? We are responsible just as much as the politicians.
There's a question coming in which says that, how do you stay motivated during these tough times?
As I said, you have to look at the positives. You have to always look at the positives that are. And don't forget that I'm 57 years old. I lived through the first JVP insurrection in 1972. I lived through Sirimao Bandaranayake 6 years of disaster. I lived through the LTT. I lived through the second JVP revolution. So I've seen, really bad politicians, really bad leaders, the country going through all kinds of shit. Everybody thought the world was going to end and the country was going to end and go bits and pieces. We've manage to live and grow and develop and do stuff and have good lives. It's a beautiful country. We can still have really good lives. I think it's very important that we look at what we can do. Don't just dwell on the positive. You read social media, you go nuts because everything is positive, negative. We have to start looking at the positives in this situation and trying to do whatever we can to change it. Today, I was thinking to myself, our president became a grandfather, right? And I was thinking to myself, what an awesome opportunity to write an open letter to him as a grandfather and say, your grandchild has come into this world. What kind of planet are you going to leave for this grandchild?
Sarinda, tomorrow he calls you.
Yeah.
And tells you, everybody looks up to you, Sarinda. I know there are a lot of youngsters.
I can tell you a lot of people who don't.
and he says, Sarinda, what is your advice to me? What would you tell the president?
The first thing I would ask is, which area do you want advice in? Because there are so many things I can tell him that I think he's doing wrong. Or everybody has an opinion. We all have opinions, Radha. All of us have an opinion of what can. So let's take my favorite subject. We'll take conservation. Right. I will tell him, first and foremost, look at your economy is in a shambles. It's not going to be fixed overnight. Port City could happen, and I'm hoping it will happen, and that can have a very positive benefit on our economy. Okay, that's one. Look at the Costa Rica example. Look at what happened in Costa Rica and how they turned their economy. It has a lot of parallels to us. And their economy was turned around on environmental development. Basically, it was ecotourism that changed the entire thing. We are talking about tourist numbers coming in and going up and everything. Most of the tourists that are coming in here are these, $10 a night hookers that are coming in here and living on the beach in Arugambe. That's not the kind of tourist Sri Lanka needs to have. We need to have people who are coming in and spending a minimum of $400 to $500 per night per person. And they're not going to come and stay in some shack on Arugambe beach or something else. We have to have beautiful properties. And if you're talking about ecotourism, which is where Costa Rica specialized, it was because they created these massive tracts of natural cover, of forest cover, and gave it to private entities to say, okay, we are going to give you 500 acres of 5,000 acres of forest, deforested land. You can reforest it, and you get to put a hotel in there and manage it and run it as a private game park. That will bring in, we have several properties that are worth thousands of dollars a night. People would pay thousands of dollars a night to go and stay at Wild Coast, at Uga. All these places, those are beautiful properties. But what do? We bring tourists into those places and take them into Yala. Yala on a busy day is like going to a bloody disaster of a zoo. You still have brilliant sightings, but the quality of sighting is rubbish because you're jostling and fighting and being bumped in by people and there's chaos. So you have to give them that experience. We can combine ecotourism, we can combine reforestation and reforest tracts of land connecting the south all the way. If you take from Yala onwards, you take below Yala, from Boondal onwards, you take it all the way through, go through Kumana, up that way through Ampara, through Basgamuwa, all that way, Polonnaruwa, Anuradhapura, Vilpattu, to the north, Kilinochchi and Mankulam, all those areas, we can easily do 30% forest cover without creating too much disruption to agriculture or whatever. Agriculture also, there's a lot of slash and burn agriculture going on. Ad hoc agriculture, right now, the reason why I believe the president is not doing anything is because people are starving. They have lost their jobs, so he's just allowing people to eat and find a living in whatever form. But we have to formalize those things as well, get them into collective areas or give them land outside, but protect this band that can go all the way to the north and develop ecotourism. That's a game changer.
What's your opinion about the fertilizer issue, Sarinda? 32 professors have written to him and said, you must not move immediately from chemical to the organic because it takes 6 years for the transfer. My dad is a tea planter and he tells me around the suicide. What is your view on this, Sarinda?
Absolutely. My father was a tea plant as well, so I have a little bit of exposure and I still get lectured on plantations. So, but I feel there's two things here. And the one was that was an absolute, it's a right thing to do, but it was done completely the wrong way. You can't change it like that. People went bankrupt. There was chaos created. My son has a small 3 or 4 acre plot in Mattala, and they were growing pumpkins and bananas and various things like that. Wiped him out completely overnight, because he couldn't buy the fertilizer. The cost went too high. It was not worth. He tried to do whatever he could from a organic point of view, and barely got anything out of it. So it kind of wiped him out. But I think there were two things here. One was that was a very badly thought through switch that had to be made, but should have been phased out, not overnight. The other thing was we were short of dollars. This was a quick fix. We don't have the money. So we are trying to find the curfews. In my opinion, one of the reasons why these curfews have been extended island-wide is public transport comes to a standstill. So the fuel bill can be saved. So we have to look at why some of these things. We are in a very tough situation, and some of these hard calls need to be made. What bothers me is that there is no transparency in what's been done. If they say this is why we are going to do it right now, bear with us, I'm sure people will come behind. There has to be communication, has to be clearer, and that's a good lesson for us in business as well. We have to be clear about what we are doing, even in an organization, so that people know what that.
So what did you do? What did you do during the pandemic? You were able to cycle?
I fixed my bike up onto an indoor trainer, and I used to ride almost 1.5 hours every day, about an hour to hour and a half every day. And I hooked myself up at my home outside this room actually, is a very decent set of weights, a rowing machine, my bicycle, a couple of benches, various things. So I have full gym set up here.
So where was this?
This was in Brazil. This was an amazing trip, and these are Jaguars. My son and my younger son's graduation present. The two of us went to Brazil.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So now, where was this one?
This was in Spiti Valley. Again, my younger son, he's also a wildlife photographer. We was photographing snow leopard, and we had a fantastic sighting. And we were just seated. We had to spend pretty much the entire day, and it was, what doesn't show here, it was about 24, 25 degrees below zero. We are freezing.
And sorry. So, how do you look at this whole story of the pandemic, and what is your take out of this?
See, Rohant, I think the thing about the pandemic was the world, everybody, had nothing to kind of use as an anchor or a bench or an indication of where we were going. We were flying in the dark. We didn't know what the hell was going on. There was fear, there was uncertainty, there was panic. And what I did very early on, and this is something that really I spoke with my children, my sons, I spoke to as many people as possible and said, look, for me, my approach was, there are things I can control and there are things that I cannot control at all. And the pandemic, what was happening externally, I couldn't control. But I could control my mental health. I could control my physical health. I could control my ability to sit at home and educate myself. As you can see, the books behind me, I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time spending time with my sons and their families. So I really, at a very early stage, I would say probably the first 3 to 4 days, designed a day for myself that really added value to me as a person. Now, having been there through it for 18 months, I'm also going mad. But, I don't think I want to stay in a lockdown situation for the rest of my life. But I must say that first 18th of March to 8th of May, if I'm not mistaken, was a fantastic period for me because my sons moved in with me. They stayed here. I have a reasonably large house with a nice garden. We were spending a lot of time together. We had really interesting chats. So much so that one of my sons, who was in a startup kind of environment, decided that he wants to go into finance. And at that point, then he started reading up on finance and learning more about finance. And then now he's he's been a year with a finance company right now. He's a stockbroker and he's doing very well and very successful, thankfully. And so a lot of good things came out of it. Both my sons changed their careers during the first part of the pandemic. They decided they had time to think, they had time to reflect, we had time to talk about what we want out of life, what our plans are. We started making, little things we would do, little projects at home, and just kept our minds occupied and stayed positive. It's a very difficult thing to do sometimes because we tend to get influenced by all the negative things that happen around us. And we all have days that are absolutely down and depressed. But I think it's important that you really, I'm not a religious person, I'm sorry. I don't believe in religion, but I go to temple, I go to Kovil, I go to church. I haven't been to a mosque for any duration of time, but I've been into a mosque. But I love going there because it's spiritually very peaceful. And rather, there's a big difference between spirituality and religion. And I believe spirituality gives a human being much more value than being canned into a religious, bracket. To each his own. But to me, it gave me time to, I find it very difficult to meditate, but I started doing a little bit of meditation also. My mind was running around all over the place and I was going a little nuts at the start, but we made some progress and, learned to cook a little bit, did all kinds of stuff to just add value to ourselves.
Sandhu, how did work life change after pandemic, or because of the first and the second wave, and how did you adjust and give leadership at that point?
So the first thing that happened was all of us had to shut down and go home. The first pandemic, there was no manufacture that took place. So we had to take immediate measures to make sure that the business was protected, cash was protected for the long term. We didn't know how long this was going to be. So at MAS, what we did was the senior leadership all took 50% plus salary cuts. And we said, okay, we will review this in October. We'll see how it's going. And in March, April, we took a salary cut. So March, April, May, June, July, August, September, we were on half pay or less than half pay. That was one. Then we made sure that we created environments that was as safe as possible for people to come back into work. For example, how we laid our factories out. So we changed the layouts, we created more space, we created barriers, we created protection devices, all kinds of stuff for when we came back to work. So I'm going to take this in two parts. The factories were set up in a way because everybody had to come back to work. We had to keep the factories going to keep the businesses going. From a business point of view, we were absolutely full with orders. But the clients also were very understanding because this was a global situation. It wasn't something just unique to Sri Lanka. So the factories we had to keep running and we had to keep making sure that people were as safe as possible and got them tested. And when the vaccinated started rolling out, we got them vaccinated fully. We have almost 70-80% of our staff totally vaccinated, both vaccines. So that was one aspect. On the other side, we created the environments and links for everybody to work from home. So anyone who didn't have to come to their workplace to put hands on machine or hands on product to do their work could work from home. And then we created, Zoom, Teams, and these were things that we had been trying to do for 3 or 4 years. Nobody would take a day off to work from home. It was a huge mindset shift. But we also, because people were working in isolation, we created chat groups. We have a chat group called Mission Slim Possible. And I believe a couple of the members are on the chat, on listening to this call, where we share our workouts every day. So there are about 70 people on that chat group. We all share our workouts. We say, okay, today we're going to do a challenge of 5,000 skips or 10,000 skips or 50 push-ups or 100 push-ups or whatever. So we kept that interaction going. Then we had regular business updates. I would talk to the entire staff about once in 2 weeks, just updating them on what was going on. And thus we created those links. And now what we're going to do, Rohantha, going forward is we are only going to bring at any given time, even if it goes back to a completely normal situation, we will have a roster and there will only be 30 to 40% of our total workforce coming to work at any given time. Now that is for the office staff. We are also looking at ways and means to create a flexible work option for people in the factories. And this is going to be quite revolutionary and we're looking at it in very, I must say, very creative ways. And it will require some commitment from the Labor Department also because laws obviously will have to be changed. You can't go by the traditional rule book. We want to allow people who have young children to be able to spend time with their young children. If you look at some of the communities we work in, they're agricultural communities. So we want to give them the opportunity during Yala and Maha, when the harvest season comes, or during crop season, or whatever it may be, that they have the freedom to take that time off. So we want to give that flexibility to everybody from the shop floor upwards. And we're working on those things right now. It has made us far more creative and far more efficient than you would have ever thought. It has reduced our cost of operation, and I cannot tell you of one incident where work has fallen short or somebody hasn't delivered on what their expectation was as a result of working from home. It has been for us a massive success. Of course, there are lots of people who are clamoring to get back to work because they are just feeling socially isolated, and human beings are not meant to be put in a cage and kept at home. And not everybody's environment is, as conducive to working from home as mine. I have adult children. I don't have little children running around. I got two crazy dogs who are just playing hell here in the background. I hope you can't see them. But apart from that, I have a very comfortable environment. So for me, it's a very different story. But if you live in a very small space with two small children and a parent and somebody else, it's a very difficult thing to do. So we have to find that balance.
So, Sarinda, how do you see this GSP plus issue? I mean, the colors are that we might sometimes lose it. How do you?
That could be very dangerous. That could be very dangerous for the industry in Sri Lanka. More than apparel, Rohanta, I think it will be very dangerous for like the rubber industry, food industry. People like that are really going to struggle, because the apparel guys, a lot of the apparel sector, especially the bigger companies, have presences all around the world. We have gone pretty much global. I mean, if you look at MAS, for example, we're in Jordan, we're in Vietnam, we're in Indonesia, we're in China, we're in Kenya, we're all over the place, Bangladesh, all over the place. So if there is a GSP issue here, we can always shift our GSP production into one of those other plants. It's the other guys that are going to struggle, and it's something that's very real. And I don't think we should be, taking it lightly.
So, Sarinda, I mean, what advice would you give to a youngster saying, I mean, the guys are studying now, the model is slightly different. They want to go to business school, get their masters a bit earlier, they want to move forward a little bit. What advice would you give to a person given your background?
There is no shortage to no shortcut to getting a good education. Get a good education. That is what will separate you in life, in your job market, in your future. It is absolutely essential in this environment. People of my generation got away because we were lucky. There was less competition at that time. But now, guys, everybody has degrees, and a bachelor's degree is like an A-levels during our time, Like, if you look at what an A-level, the equivalent of an A-level now would probably be a bachelor's degree. You need to go and get higher. Otherwise, there's opportunity for everybody. Even at bachelor's levels, there are great opportunities available. But the one thing that has changed very significantly due to the pandemic is now the globe is your workplace. You can apply for jobs anywhere in the world now. There are so many jobs that can be done from remote locations. That is one. The gig economy has become very fashionable and something that is catching up very fast. You don't have to be confined to one job. You could be working in multiple areas, doing multiple different things without the traditional structure that people like myself have grown up in. You all have the opportunity of looking at maybe doing something part-time in another time zone, in another country, using the technology that's available. Sri Lanka is still a beautiful place to live in, and I can't even dream of thinking of living elsewhere, anywhere, regardless of what the situation is. Bad politicians will come, good politicians may come, we hope. But whatever, we can sit here and bitch about everything, or just we can enjoy what a beautiful country we live in and try and make it more beautiful and do what we can for it. If we all ditch and run to another country, I don't know whether that's a solution. I believe that now there are opportunities for all of you all to develop very strong careers and stable lives in Sri Lanka and work anywhere in the world remote.
Sorry, there's a question coming in on my WhatsApp, and they're saying that you're a very successful human being. Your attitude to life is very positive. How do you cope up with illogical, inefficient, not wanting to correct mistake hierarchy of politicians that we are right now going after?
Don't let them get to me. It's beyond our control, Rhonda. If we try to think about everything that all the idiots that are running around, we have had the morons running around forever, no? You can't allow them to, if I'm trying to do something, like say, for example, now build the hospital. So far, we have kept our gloves on and been very cautious about what we say and what we do. But it's coming to a point where we're going to take this social. We're going to take it out. We're going to put it on social media and say nothing is happening and start making a huge song and dance about the inefficiency of this operation. And watch and see, it'll get done. Because you'll have to make a noise and shame a few people and name a few people and make a big noise about it, it'll get done. So my thing is, if you worry about every moron that is running around doing stupid things, that's going to make you a very sad person. And trust me, these guys are all around the world. This is not unique. This is not just endemic to Sri Lanka. This is not special for us. Corrupt politicians, inefficient politicians, and nut jobs like this in control, it's a global thing. They're all over the place. So don't let it bother you. I keep asking, my father is 89, almost 90 years, 89 years old. And he watches the news and he scolds, and he gets all angry and he scolds. Like, what do you care? I just look at him and I'm like, what do you care? One, it doesn't bother you. Your life is not going to change at all. You have everything you want in life and you're now 90 years old. What more do you want? No? So there is no point just barking at the television and screaming and getting yourself angry. I used to be a person who, if somebody cut me off in traffic, I tried to hammer the bugger and cut him off. I must say that to me, when I think back, it's almost like another person. Because now I just don't get worked up by meaningless things. So I think it's important that when you have something where a politician or somebody is interfering and preventing it from moving forward, then do whatever necessary to try and change it if it's impacting you personally. Otherwise, don't let it bother you. It's a skill that you develop. You have to ask yourself, why does it bother me? And, I had an amazing experience, Rohanta, with Marshall Goldsmith. I had 2 days with him, right? You've heard of Marshall Goldsmith. He was in Sri Lanka as well. I did a executive learning thing at Dartmouth, and with that came 2 days, of which there was like 2 hours one-on-one. 2 days with Marshall Goldsmith, and he just changed my life. And he's a business coach, but he's a disciple of the Dalai Lama, and he's a person who's really talks a lot about staying calm and not letting people. His book Triggers, for example, talks about trigger mechanisms, and we get angry about things that trigger us. So I learned a hell of a lot, and the one thing I learned was to control my temper, and let me rephrase that. The one thing I learned was to get rid of my temper. I don't have a temper. Occasionally, there may be a few people who send me text messages now saying, don't lie. Occasionally, I do lose my cool, but 90% of the time that I used to get angry, now I don't. Because it's just not worth it. When you get angry with somebody in traffic, when you get angry with a politician, you think the politician gives a shit. No, he doesn't even care. She doesn't even give a hoot. You are creating toxins in yourself and you're damaging yourself. Anger at things that are outside your control are useless.
So, Sarin, the last question from you. I know I've taken a lot of your time, and it's so beautiful to see the kind of energy and how much you're committed to sharing a little bit of you with youngsters, and they're looking for direction right now, so it's really beautiful. So if you were 21 years old and you have
Disaster.
to give, yeah, you want to give some advice to young Sarinder, what is that advice that you would give?
Don't stress the little stuff. I spent a lot of time stressing the little stuff. That is one. And tough one, Rohan, because I don't look back at my life with a lot of regret. Yeah, I have had, issues with my personal life, and all those things have happened, but those happen to people. It's just part of the journey. It's a tough one because I could have probably done a lot better, but again, maybe I'm copping out by saying I'm quite happy where I am in my life. So looking back at 21 years, I would have probably told myself at that time, the John Keells share would have been at about 3 rupees. 5 rupees. I would have said, buy a lot of John Keells shares, buy a lot of Haley shares, buy Expo at 2 rupees when it goes in 2020. No, I can't really think of myself too much. I made some very wise choices at a time where I thought my life was in complete shambles. For example, I got mental health help during a time where I was, that it wasn't very fashionable at that time. Nobody knew. And even my parents, when I told them that I was getting help, I mean, the attitude was like, isn't that for mad people? So I got help when I needed it. I was fortunate enough to realize that I needed help, and I got the help. It helped me. It's massively. To this day, I continue to meet with the counselor. I say that I'm going for a top-up occasionally because sometimes there are things that you just need to talk with somebody. See, the misconception about mental health professionals and getting a counselor is that you go when you're nuts or when you're having a trauma. No, sometimes there are issues in your life that you find difficult to deal with on your own, and you just need somebody unbiased to help you. And so I continue to do that. So so there's very little I would change. I've enjoyed the journey so far, and I don't think I would have changed a hell of a lot.
Thank you very much, Sarinder. And no wonder people talk so much about you. I mean,
too kind.
This is the first time we have had such a beautiful discussion of a leader who doesn't talk about just work, but talks about so much to life. And you have very few people who have that kind of mindset of actually living life, and it's so beautiful.
I know you do this.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
you're multidimensional.
I do too. I mean, but it's. I mean, you're a legend. Sorry, Dan. And actually, I really like to thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
I hope one day you can come live and have a chat with the youngsters when the
I would love to.
And
I would love to.
Thank you so much, Sarinder. And it's actually beautiful. Kaushali, over to you, Kaushali.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Dear students, do tell me or do tell our staff the whole book that you can get with these experiences, not anywhere else, right? So this is the beauty of we bringing all these amazing personalities. And I would genuinely want to thank you, Mr. Sarinder. It's amazing to have listened to you. And dear students, I'm sure you have an amazing lesson, not only just one lesson, but a lot of lessons that you can get from this beautiful human being. And I really want to extra thank you as well, as a special thank you today for bringing this advocacy and of course the awareness of having to reach out for support when you have the need without having to rely on just yourself. As you said very correctly, it's very, very important in the month of this well-being and awareness that is going on. It's an amazing platform, and thank you so much for bringing that awareness as well. So having said that, we come to the end of another amazing session, another wonderful, fruitful session. And this ends for today. So we would meet back again in another session with Meeting Up an Experts. Thank you very much and have a
Thank you.
good day.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night. Bye.
Good night.